Welcome to The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron. It is season 2, and I'm delighted to welcome back a guest from season 1. That's Carl Honoré. You may have seen his TED Talks or seen him on social media or seen him in conference live all over the world. Carl is the author of a number of great books, best-selling books. One of them is In Praise of Slowness, and we're going to talk a little about that concept at the beginning of this conversation. And then we'll move on to a book that I absolutely love and highly recommend, and that is Carl Honoré's Bolder, Making the Most of Our Longer Lives. Just a little excerpt from a couple of the reviews of this book. The Times of London said, Bolder makes some thought-provoking proposals. It's about age, but it's not a book for the old. And the Daily Mail said, a joyously life-enhancing book that shatters the myths about aging. It's so interesting. Can't wait to share this conversation with you. Here's my conversation with Carl Honoré. Carl, it's great to see you again.
It's wonderful to be back.
Yeah, it's lovely and amazing that we have technology that allows us to connect in this way without airline tickets and jet lag. Mm-hmm. So before we go forward to the book that I really want to talk about, which is Bolder, I want to just refer back to a book that's had a huge imprint on me, a huge impact on me, which was, as I read it at the time, it's on my shelf there, In Praise of Slowness. I think those are the two versions of the copy that went out to the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think about that tug of war that we have constantly, which is how much are we willing to notice that we can control the tempo? And I think you talked about tempo in the tempo giusto in the book. And in our own lives, we are, whether it's how we're eating or how we're cooking or how we're moving in the world, there's so much sense of, I'm so busy, people's answer to everything, which means everything has to be done quickly. But we know that in reality, things are sometimes better and often enjoyed more and more productive when we're able to be more fully in moments, which is slowing things down. And I have a new colleague here at the synagogue, and she was talking to young professionals because we have a young professional social program. And she was saying to them, what are you looking for in experiences? Are you looking for that we could curate for you? And one of the things that came out as a theme to her, and I don't think she'd read your book, so I then put her on to this idea in your book and how you really expand this idea, is this idea that they just wanted time to slow down together. And I think that was really powerful, that even people in their 20s and 30s, that's the cohort, were saying, something's a little out of whack. We need a little recalibration. And if you're going to give us experiences, could you please make them experiences when we get to do something we're not ordinarily doing, which is just slowing the tempo. What's your thought on that?
Well, it's interesting that you said even people in their 20s are seeking slowness. I would argue that it's especially people in their 20s. I mean, I find that cohort have a natural and profound affinity for the idea that slower is often better because they have grown up in a society absolutely marinated in speed, hurry, distraction, and overstimulation, right? And they're paying the price. They're feeling that they're racing through their lives instead of living it. So when I look out across what's now known as the slow movement, which is people in all walks of life looking for ways to put on the brakes, do things better by slowing down to the right tempo and being fully in the moment, doing things well instead of fast, many of those movements are led by people in their 20s, right? Who've come up through childhoods where they were on this constant hamster wheel, everything a dash to the finish line. And they're just saying, they're not waiting till they hit 40 or 50 to say, hang on, I want to put the brakes on. They're hitting 22 and saying, whoa, I need to take my foot off the gas here, right? I'm skimming the surface of my life instead of living it fully. And so it's not surprising at all to hear that kind of conversation is happening within your synagogue. Just the other day, I saw a piece in one of the newspapers about a whole phenomenon of that digital generation, digital natives, in their 20s who are taking big sweeping steps to step back from the web, right? To step back from social media. Yeah. They're not waiting for their parents or other people, older people, to step in and dictate how they use screens and when they pull the plug. They're just saying, this is enough. We've just had enough, right? Sure, Instagram's fun, bit of Snapchat's a good laugh, and Tinder can be helpful and diverting sometimes too, but not always. We don't want every moment of our existence to be accelerated and fragmented by the gadgets, the weapons of mass distraction we carry around in our pockets. So they are stepping up and saying, how can we slow things down? What can we do differently? How can we use our gadgets differently? How can we be in physical spaces together in ways that allow us to slow down and connect more deeply? And that for me is the great source of optimism when I think about and survey the future of slow in this fast world. It makes me think, yeah, we will get there because this is something that we all have skin in the game on. And the very fact that so many of these slow movements are being pioneered and pushed by the young shows that the dial is swinging in the right direction.
I think it pushes against a societal norm that, at least I'm 57 this week, that I was raised with. Thank you. Which is this idea that we have to be productive, and that's a good life. A good life is full and it's productive, and it is. It's not lying on the sofa looking up at the ceiling, because that doesn't fit into a good life. A good life is pursuing goals, and I love this idea that they're saying yes, but, or yes, and we can do both. It also flies in the face of what I'm hearing from employers also, because I also hear employers talking about Gen Z, Gen X, whichever gens, are coming into the workplace, especially post-COVID, with this sense of what's perceived as entitlement. Listen, I want to work from home. What are you going to give me in this job? Rather than the gratitude for the job. And employers are going, hold on, what's going on in this world? They're coming in saying, I need to work from home from this day, and this day. They're asking for certain kind of lifestyle requirements that I think you're saying, yes, they might fly in the face of what we think is normal, acceptable to how we were raised to be in the workplace, but there's something positive in it as well.
I think absolutely there's something to celebrate in what you've described there. Now, this idea that, well, the notion of being busy, putting busyness on a pedestal, that busyness becomes an end in itself, that you've got to be active and busy. It has become the guiding keynote of modern turbo consumerism and late capitalism, but it has deep roots, right? You can go back to early Protestant thinking, the devil will find work for idle hands to do, right? This sort of idea that's constantly bumping around in the culture, particularly Western culture, that you've got to be active in doing stuff, producing things, otherwise somehow you're failing or you're morally reprehensible, right? That this is almost an evil thing to be,
there
to
is
slow
a moral
down.
Concept to it. That's right.
There's definitely a moral dimension to it. But I think, and I do feel the tectonic plates are shifting on this, and you've just put your finger on it there when you describe what's happening in workplaces across the world with young people coming in and having a different set of demands and expectations. That is because I think we have bumped up against the limits of that fast, busy all the time approach to life. And the pandemic was a wake-up call, I think. It was, if nothing else, a great global workshop in slowness. And of course, it was a nightmare in many ways, but I think it also opened people's eyes up to the fact that there are other ways of being in the world. There are other priorities, that getting up and working a 12-hour day, 5 days a week in a air-conditioned office with strip lighting is that really what life is all about? Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't work hard and you can't strive to have a great career. You can't do amazing things in the world. Of course you can. But to hitch that kind of a dream to this toxic idea that you've got to be nose to the grindstone, this awful idea of this constant hustle, right? The idea that anything that resembles rest or reflection is a waste of time is so poisonous and so inhumane that I welcome this change in the workplace with young people coming in and saying, because they've looked at our generation, right? I'm 57 too, right? So we were forged in similar crucibles. And I think that generation are looking at us and saying, you know what? I don't want that, right? I don't want to sacrifice my dreams, my soul, my health, my future. I don't want to sacrifice all these things on the altar of what? On the altar of a career where the company will just throw me out on the street with all my possessions in a cardboard box, with 1 month's pay after 20 years in the job, or I get a pension that just evaporates because the markets collapse. They're saying that there are other things to aspire to. And I think that's a healthy question for society to be asking itself. What is work for? What is life about? what matters, right? What really matters. And once you drill down into that really deep question, what matters, that allows you to recast how you live every moment of your life. And when you start saying what matters is a whole range of things. Work, achieving things, of course, is one of those things. But you don't just have work being the only thing, then that's a game changer. And I think that will lead to healthier lives and a healthier society.
Yeah, I want to shift us to Boulder, and from one age perception and experience to the other. And because I'm living in both of these in terms of my interactions, not only with my kids, but also with people in my community, and thinking about this book that I think is so important. Last night I was at a book club dinner. It's a guys book club, but once a year we have women with us as well, partners, wives, and it's a great, fantastic community. And we were talking about another book, a book on rock and roll. And somehow the idea of authenticity came up in that, and in relation to this old rocker. And at some point, his lyrics start to talk about real life as he knows it, not what he was trying in his youth to project it to be. And it brought me to talking about your book. So just know that you made it into that book club. And it's a good place to be. And something I want to go to, and I want to get there, we don't have to start there, is this idea that really comes through to me from your book, Boulder, that in some ways, or maybe largely and importantly, aging is a process of moving toward authenticity and away from the fabrication of self.
Yeah, I think that you pulled on something that I think runs right the way through Boulder, and that's very much how I did not see aging myself, because I was driven to ride Boulder, having been for most of my life a card-carrying member of the cult of youth. Right, I abhorred the idea of aging. I didn't want to confront it. I thought it was a downhill spiral from 35, 40, wherever it was, until I had a kind of wake-up call and began to step back and reflect and think more deeply about it. And that's when I realized that aging is much more what you're describing it there. That there's a wonderful quote from David Bowie, which I think I have in the book, which is that aging is an extraordinary process whereby you become the person you were always meant to be. And I think that kind of gets at what aging really is. It's not what the cult of youth, which is what drives so much of our culture these days, tells us, which is that with every birthday after a certain age, you become less. You become less relevant, right, less creative, less dynamic, less attractive, less fun, less sensual, less all the good stuff. You become less those things, right? And we've imbibed, we've taken all that in by osmosis, and it's fed this terror of growing older, this shame and guilt that surrounds it. But so many of those things that we say to ourselves about aging are just not true, right? That actually many things stay the same as you get older, and a lot of them get better. And one of them that gets better is I'll use your word, authenticity, right? You get away from all of the cheap status games we play in early life, where we're trying to impress other people. We're playing to the gallery. We're not really living in an alignment with who we actually are, because in a sense, we don't yet know who we are. I think we're still working it out. That's a big part. And one of the great joys of aging is you get closer to the core of who you are. And that Bowie quote, I think, kind of gets at it. That another way I think about aging as well is a quote from Michelangelo, who talked about the job of the sculptor is to see the angel in the granite, in the stone, and set her free. And I think that's another lovely way of thinking about how aging gets you to the core, the heart of the matter, because it's really a process of chipping away. You're chipping away the stone, you're chipping away what's superfluous, extraneous, trivial, pointless. You're getting down to the essence of who you are, the truth of who you are. And I think one of the things we might talk about at some stage is the famous U-shaped happiness curve, that people tend to be happiest in childhood, that falls steadily till we bottom out in middle age. Then we bounce back up again, so that you find that across all socioeconomic groups and all cultures, the people that report the highest levels of life satisfaction and happiness are the over 55s. There are several reasons for that, but I think one of them is this authenticity. I think it's because we get to the core, we get to the heart of who we really are in that second half of our lives. And what a great gift. I mean, it's this kind of thing that just puts a smile on your face and a spring in your step if you embrace it, which I think a lot of people still run away from. because they associate later life with dementia, depression, all the things that nobody wants to be associated
Atrophy.
with, when in fact, there's so many things waiting out there that are good for us in the second half.
Yeah, Carl, let's go to the beginning of the book because you tell a great story. And I love that you open with the story of playing hockey. Do you want to just share that?
Sure, yeah. Well, my wake-up call for confronting the whole question of age came at a ball hockey tournament where I was playing up in a national tournament in England. I live in London. I play ball hockey, ice hockey. I'm Canadian though, so this is part of my national heritage and legacy, right? So I keep the Canadian flame flying by playing ball hockey every week. I'm playing in this tournament. I play for a team called the London Jets. We were in the quarterfinals, locked in a 0-0 tie with a team that we had annihilated the year before. But we just could not get the goal we needed to get into the semifinals. And I could feel the nerves and indignation coursing through my teammates until out of nowhere, I scored the goal that got us into the semis, right? And it wasn't just any goal, right? It was one of those highlight reel specials, match of the day goal that I'll be dining out on for the rest of my life. So we won the game. I came off and I was floating on air. I just felt like a superhero until one of the organizers of the tournaments, so this tournament, sidled up to me and he said, "Carl, nice goal, well done, semis, congrats. But guess what? I've been flicking through player profiles just for fun, and it turns out that you are the oldest player here." Now, I knew I was one of the oldest, right? I mean, look at me, gray hair. I'm not deluded, right? But to be the oldest, it shook me to the core. It rocked me to my very foundations. In the blink of an eye, I went from goal scorer to granddad. And all of these questions began crowding in. Like, do I look out of place here? Are people laughing at me behind my back? Should I take up a more age-appropriate pastime like bingo, maybe? And it was just an extraordinary moment where suddenly my chronological age took on this terrible power to define and limit me. And I came away from that tournament thinking, this can't be right. How can it be that suddenly the numbers on my birth certificate are making me feel so bad about doing something that I've done my whole life that I love doing, that I'm still doing well and getting a lot of fun out of. And so I came away from that tournament thinking, surely there must be a better story to tell ourselves about aging, a different way of thinking about growing older. And spoiler alert, there is. Much better.
Yeah, so I think some people are still incredulous, so they're asking, hold on, all right, you're going to give me a bright side of something that I truly still dread and I've seen in other people, so it's evidenced around me. My parents, the people in my society are showing me that age is unattractive and undesirable, and yet somehow you're going to sell me on this notion that I'm wrong. So let's unpack that slowly. Let's go to what we think of as, I'll call it a dark side of aging, the physicalization of it. And talk me through the moment that you discuss in the book, donning the aging suit and what that felt like and what the experience was.
Yeah, well, the aging suit was a real shock to the system. An aging suit is something that was originally designed in the car industry, so that you put on a suit and it adds effectively 30 years to your age, to give younger designers a sense of what it might feel like for an older consumer to be trying to operate a car or whatever piece of equipment. And it is apocalyptic. I mean, the thing about it is that it gives you every single impairment that aging can visit upon you in the blink of an eye, right? You put on the suit and it changes your hearing, it impairs your sight, your joints. I mean, just everything at once, right? It's the full English breakfast of aging, all with the stroke of a pen. And I went to try the suit on, already thinking, okay, I'm writing a book about aging being not as bad as we think, and maybe there's some upsides. And I came away from wearing that suit thinking, maybe I should shelve this book. Aging clearly sucks, right? But then I had a little think about it, and I came to two conclusions. One, well, as I've just said a moment ago, this gives you all of the possible conceivable impairments of aging, all of them at once, right? So in real life, that doesn't happen. For a start, nobody gets all of them, right? You usually get one or two or a few. And the other thing is, the ones you do get, you usually have 20, 30, 40 years to get used to them. You don't just, snap a finger and suddenly they're upon you. So that's one thing that made me think, okay, well, maybe this wasn't quite as bad as it felt. The second thing was that the next bit of research I did for the book was to hop on a train and go across to a masters cycling tournament in the north of France, where I walked into the velodrome. And master sports is for people, older, 35 and 50 and up in different age levels. And it was full of cyclists whizzing around the track at unbelievable speeds. And some of them were in their 70s and 80s. I mean, they were just blowing me away. And at that time, I was in my 40s. And I just thought, okay, well, there clearly is a different way to think about this. There's a more nuanced discussion to talk about the things that we lose physically as we age. And of course, there's stuff that happens as we get older, especially physically, that we're not going to love, right? That's just part of the package. But there are two things to hold on to here. One is that, we have it within our power to defer a lot of that stuff or to mitigate it through, just staying active, diet, all the stuff that more and more of us are doing nowadays. And in fact, because we're doing it, we're extending health span. We're expanding the number of years that people remain vigorous, healthy, in good form. In fact, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, I think, released a big report recently pointing out that the headline of the report was 70 is the new 50, which is a phrase that I never use, and we can unpack why later. But I mention it because they were basing that on statistics that show that today the average 70-year-old is as cognitively fit as the average, I think it was 52-year-old was 25 years ago, and as cognitively fit as the average 56-year-old was. So this is a quantum leap in what we're achieving with aging now. So those are other things to throw into the mix when people immediately knee-jerk into saying, oh no, after 40, everything's going to hurt. I won't be able to play my favorite sports. I won't get up in the morning. No, that's just not true. Look, there's 80-year-olds climbing Mount Everest, right? There's 79-year-olds running ultra marathons. I always suggest to people, be able to say, what's one way to reframe my aging and think about it in a different way and lift my spirits when I contemplate my own later years. And one of my suggestions is always to create your own pantheon of people who age well, people who, when you think of them, you think, yeah, I could be that, right? And one of the people in my pantheon is a former U.S. Marine called George Hood, who a few years back set a new world record for planking. Now, you know how planking is, right?
Sure.
So I'm a pretty good planker, right? It's been a while since I did it because I've changed my routine recently, but I was planking regularly about 8 minutes, which is pretty decent, right? Wow. And I'm 57, so that's respectable.
Minutes?
Like holding plank for 8 minutes. Yeah, that's not bad.
More than respectable.
But George Hood, he set the record. You know what? I won't ask you to guess, but so I'll just say how long George Hood had held his plank for. 8 hours, 15 minutes, and 15 seconds. You think 8 hours? I'm struggling at 8 minutes. Many people are struggling at 3 minutes. And George Hood, when he did that, was 62 years old, right? So he was 5 years older than you and I are today. So there's so many of these stories out there, especially with social media now, that we can latch onto and say, you know what? That's the version of later life that I can aspire to. And I think that is lifting spirits, lifting expectations, and delivering better results for people's aging right across the culture at the moment, which is another reason to feel good about it.
What about the positivity effect that you describe in the book?
Well, that's something, I talked about the U-shaped happiness curve.
Right.
That seems to be hardwired into our primate genes, right? Because they've spotted a similar U-shaped happiness curve in chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans. Right. So it seems to be something that's part of the fabric of the great journey of human life. One of the theories floating around for it is, I think some people call it the happy grandparent theory, and it's based on the idea that way back when our ancient ancestors in the savannah in Africa were sitting around the fire, if the grandparents were downbeat, grim, crotchety, grumpy, always complaining about how sore their knees were and saying how wonderful life on the savannah was when they were kids, that's a downer for the tribe, right? That lowers the mood and then lowers the chances of survival. But if your grandparents are glass half full, if they're on the upward curve of the happiness curve, the upward side, then that is more likely to lift the spirits of the tribe and improve survival chances. So there's some arguments here that this is something that's really just woven into our whole human experience, is having this happiness boost. It's good for us personally as grandparents or older people, but it also filters out into the broader culture as a good thing, which when people talk about aging population these days, it's often held up as a boogeyman, right? As this terrible thing that's coming, the silver tsunami, the aging population. But in fact, there may be some silver linings here, which is the world is filling up with people who are a little bit, glass half full, all the good things that can come in later life. And that might just be a a good thing. I think one of the other reasons that we start to feel more happy in the second half of our lives is, and I think anyone over the age of 40 will probably recognize this, is that as you get into that fourth, fifth decade, you just don't care so much about what other people think of you. Remember Ann Landers, the famous agony aunt? She once said, at 20, people worry about what others think of them. At 40, we stop worrying about what others think of us. At 60, we realize they were never thinking of us at all, which kind of gets at that, what's the right word? The sense of lightness or freedom that comes upon you in the second half. You know who you are. You feel less pressure to tiptoe around other people's expectations. You're less beholden to their opinions. And that just frees you up to define your life on your terms in a way that's harder, I think, when you're younger. So that's another huge benefit that comes with later life, is we just don't care as much about what other people think. And that is so liberating in so many ways.
Yeah, I think you say at some point in the book, and it might be later in the book, that we mind less, but we care more.
Yes.
And that's in some ways juxtaposing minding in terms of our thoughts of other people's perceptions of us, but our care increases in terms of how we look after the world, look after others, get involved, volunteer, etc. Is that right?
Yes, that is. And it's a beautiful balancing act that happens there. We do mind less because we're less worried about what other people think of us, but we care more. And this is another phenomenon that people have spotted across all cultures and times and places. And it has different names. Some call it gerotranscendence. There's various terms for it, but basically what it means is that once you get into your sort of 40s, more or less, people become less obsessed with material gain, getting one up over other people, climbing the greasy pole. They get more interested in being of service, in giving back, of serving something greater than themselves, right? Which is why you see people, and people often assume that in later life, people get into doing volunteering more because they've got more time and all that stuff. And that may be part of it. Right. But there's also this deeper drive, this more profound impulse that comes upon us as we get into the second half of our lives, that we want to reach out, we care more. We start thinking about planting that oak tree that other people will sit in its shade long after we've gone. Those sorts of things start to matter to us more. And when you talk about an aging population and whether that has some upsides, there's another upside. If more people in the population are more inclined to be of service and to give back, that's got to be a good thing too. So I think that's another one of the benefits of aging, is that we just get less caught up with our own stuff, right? It's such a relief, I think.
A number I wrote down that came out of the later part of the book, you talk about, and tell me if I'm right about this, 8 trillion is an estimate of the dollars in terms of the value of senior philanthropy and volunteerism. Does that make sense? Or that's a projection?
That could make sense. I haven't got that figure in front of me, but we're talking trillions here, both in the amount of money that older people put into philanthropy, but also what they spend on stuff, right? This is when you think about marketing and just business in general. So much of marketing is obsessed with the younger demographic. It's kind of, we've got to go for the young people. That's where the excitement and the dynamism and the money is and all that stuff. That's just not true. The money is actually, this cohort of over 50s is loaded, right? Obviously many people over 50 are struggling to make ends meet, and that's appalling, and that's part of a bigger conversation about social equity and economic justice we need to be reckoning with. But the big numbers are that the over 50s are sitting on, again, trillions worldwide, trillions of dollars of disposable income, and yet, they just get ignored by advertising. It's quite remarkable. Cars are a really good example. I just saw the other day that the average age of a car buyer in the UK, which is where I live, is 55, all right? Which is 2 years younger than me, right? But when was the last time you or I or anyone saw a car ad with anyone who looked remotely like one of us, right?
Right.
Everybody looks 35 and under. And yet, where's the money coming from? It's coming from people like you, me, and everybody else in their 50s and up. So there's this weird disconnect, which I think now is starting to change because marketers are also cluing into this wider seismic shift that's happening in the culture around us and the population. And they're realizing that the side of the bread that's buttered is the side that's marked 45, 50 and over.
Yeah, you mentioned a term, that pejorative term, the silver tsunami, that I was introduced to a couple of years ago. I was meeting with a senior consultant and talking about senior concerns. What are things that we should be thinking about in relation to community and society and our own families? And she said, we're heading into the silver tsunami. And I said, great term. What does it mean? She said the point in time, first time, or the largest number of, call it, aging adults on the planet in recorded history. And that to me was, first of all, a negative term. I don't think that we need to call it a silver tsunami, because tsunami is a great threat. It's also a great opportunity. And in some ways, something we should just be embracing, because it's reality. There are going to be fewer 18-year-olds than 80-year-olds on the planet, which is, a paradigm shift. And one thing that the book brings out that we're doing and seeing the value of in our community is bridging intergenerational gaps.
Yeah.
And that's been remarkable for us. Do you want to just clarify or elucidate?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of all things multi-generational. I mean, if you go back through history, that's how human beings moved through the world, was multi-generational. Everything was multi-generational. People of different ages mixed everywhere, from the fields to markets to festivals to church pews to the home to the street. We just mixed up. And then we got into the modern world. What do? We siloed. We siloed off into different little age bubbles. And it starts at school, right? Then you turn up on the first day at kindergarten and everyone in your cohort was born within one calendar year of each other, right? And we kind of carry on like that. And what does that age siloing allow to happen? Well, it allows stereotypes about other age groups to rush in to fill the void. Because if you don't have constant and rich and multi-layered contact with people of different ages, you're low-hanging fruit. You're easy prey for stereotypes. You're just going to buy into the tropes that everybody who's 20 is can't stop looking at their phone, as an entitled snowflake, and everybody over 50 is a crotchety person, who can't get out of bed without, cracking 10 joints, which is unhelpful to all of us, right? We all are victims of ages, and we all pay a price for these age stereotypes. And I always say, when people say, well, what do we do to take down these stereotypes? The first step is mixing up the generations, right? Whether it's in the workplace, in churches or synagogues or homes or neighborhoods or sports clubs, whatever it is, wherever you can just get out there and expose yourself to people of different ages, we ought to do that, because that's what humans have always done. It also, there's a lot of research that shows that it makes us happier. It makes us less defensive about our age, makes us feel more hopeful about our own future, especially for younger people when they meet older people who are not, decrepit and angry and living their worst life, and actually maybe living some version of their best life. Suddenly your own later life begins to look a lot more hopeful. So I think, anytime you can push the multi-generational button, push it. Yeah,
you talk about best life, worst life. I think a lot of the people that go into old age miserable were miserable. So it's really not about the old age that brought on their misery. They were predisposed to glass half empty. And now, of course, it's not going to suddenly change when they get older in most cases.
Yeah.
And the people who were predisposed to joy, let's say, to gratitude particularly, are probably going to be happier in old age. So sometimes we look at the snapshot of old age and see misery, but we don't zoom in to see and say, ask that person's son or daughter, how happy was he at 40 or 35? Yeah. He's never been that happy. So that might be worth thinking about. Within the picture of a society, individualism matters in terms of how we live our lives on the trek in our lives. Something that I think about a lot as a result of your book is this idea that there are opportunities. The assessment, the assumption that we make is we're in a diminuendo of our lives. There is still sound right till the end, but it's not as rich and full as it was. But there's so much in your book that's about volunteerism, that's about work, that's about creativity. That was one of the things that came out. There's so much about creativity that is unleashed in later years.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that really surprised me, as so many things did in this research, because as I said at the outset, I went in with some pretty cult of youthy ageist goggles, right? I was expecting to, the story I had told myself was that everything just got worse after a certain age. And it doesn't, right? And creativity is a very good example, because the culture is constantly telling us that creativity belongs to the young and that you fall off a creativity cliff at some point. But that's just not true. The truth is that human beings can be immensely creative at any age. And in fact, some forms of creativity depend on two things that only aging can confer: time and experience, which is why history is studded with examples of people doing triumphantly creative work in later life, from Michelangelo, I mentioned earlier, to Matisse, Beethoven, Bach. Louise Bourgeois came up with her iconic giant spiders in her 80s. There's a prize over here in the UK called the Turner Prize, which goes to visual artists for creative breakthrough thinking. And through most of its history, the Turner Prize had an age cap. You had to be 50 or under to enter. The assumption, of course, being that after 50, you were over the hill, you were past your prime, your creative juices had run dry. But a few years back, the Turner Prize abolished the age cap. Why? Well, in the words of the chair, because an artist can experience a creative breakthrough at any age. At any age, right? That three little words to lift the spirits of anyone worried about being past their prime or over the hill, or being the wrong side of 50. Because the truth is that there is no wrong side of 50. There's just the side you're on and what you choose to make of it. And you look what's happened with the Turner Prize in the intervening years. 4 years ago, it was a 63-year-old artist who won the Turner Prize. A couple years ago, it was a 66-year-old artist, right? People can hit creative home runs at any age of life. What stops us more often than not is self-talk. It's the stuff we tell ourselves inside our heads, such as, I'm too old for this. I'm the wrong side of 50. I'm over the hill. I'm showing my age. I'm feeling all this. The more you say that, the trouble with ageism is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you buy into the ageist idea that aging is all about decline, you're more likely to suffer. And the science is very clear on this. And this is one of the most shocking things that I discovered in my research, is that if you embrace the cult of youth and you worship youth and denigrate aging, you're going to age less well. You're going to suffer more physical cognitive decline. You're increasing your chances of getting dementia. You even stand a chance of dying younger, up to 7.5 years younger. So think of that for a moment. If you just by buying into the cult of youth, by making little jokes about senior moments and wrong side of 50 and all that stuff, you could be leaving up to 7.5 years of life on the table, right? It's just mind-boggling, the damage we do to ourselves with these wrong-headed stories we tell ourselves about age. And when we buy into a much more hopeful, optimistic, and reasonable approach to aging, we age better. And it comes back to what you were saying there, that some people are miserable at 40, they're going to be miserable. If you, whatever age you are right now, if you could start pivoting away from the cult of youth and embracing aging in all its richness, you're going to be so much happier and you're going to thrive so much more 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, whatever age you are.
And the power of the mind is so strong, and we see that more and more. You're reminding me of, I think she's at UC San Francisco, Kelly McGonigal, social psychologist. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that she was looking at, like you, she had a very, very successful TED Talk, or you've had several. And her research was looking at the effect of stress on the lining of the arteries. And essentially what she was showing, not the thickness of the arteries. And she showed a person, two arteries side by side, cut out, cross section. And one is the effect, and you see the thickening of the walls of stress on the artery of a person who believes that stress is bad for them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other, where there's barely a visible change in the thickness of the wall, the stress is the same, but it's on the artery of a person who doesn't believe it's bad for them. And I'm still stuck with that image in my head from years ago, seeing it. That really means that what I perceive becomes my reality. As you say, in aging, if I think negatively, I will presumably manifest negativity. Yeah. And a negative experience. And we're that powerful that we're affecting our longevity. It's incredible.
It is remarkable. But it's also such a good piece of news, isn't it? Because it means that we all have a lever to pull. Right? We all can do something. Because there's nothing more frustrating and dispiriting than being told that, you can do this. But there's no easy route to it. It's difficult. I mean, but if you've got an easy step, which is to start telling yourself a different story, start using different language, start reframing, that's there. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. You don't need to download an app or pay a therapist. You could just start today by, twiddling the knob inside your head and telling yourself a different story, imagining things differently, reframing. That's there for all of us. Makes a huge difference.
It really does. I know that the realities for many people of age are that they're going to the doctors much more often. Mm-hmm. They're lining up more medication in their kitchen or wherever it is. That's a reality. I spoke to somebody years ago who said, look, I used to dread taking that tablet every day for my blood pressure. I used to feel like it was a sign of my own mortality, perhaps. And he said, and then I had a flip in my mind, a switch change, where I made a decision to go, hold on, I get to live longer and see my kids and my loved ones and do the things I love because of this pill. So therefore, he just reframed it and took something that was dreadful to him and turned it into a source of gratitude and happiness ultimately. What about, well, let me just give an anecdote. There are a lot of people in my community, as fits what we talked about societally, who are older. And many of these people are finding romance and love later in life. And that's something you talk about a lot in the book. That used to be, I even forget, I can't remember a time when that wasn't normal, but now it is the norm. At least in the society where I am, you see romance, I see romance. I just did a wedding 2 or 3 weeks ago, a few weeks ago, for a couple. She's 95.
Wonderful.
And he's 89 or 90. And it was just the most beautiful thing. Their kids, grandkids, friends, everybody's there. They're crazy about each other. And it's not like they just met. They've been together for decades. They just said, you know what, now, if not now, when?
Yeah.
So what are your realizations about this?
Well, that was another one of the falling away of the blinkers doing the research, because I went in thinking, well, sex, romance, all that, butterflies in the stomach, first date nerves, all those things. That's for young people, right? That just isn't, it's just so untrue. And people can have exactly the same physiological, emotional, metaphysical, philosophical experience of falling in love, of falling out of love, of going deeper with someone. All those things are there at every single age. And it's becoming more accepted. I mean, there was a time, I think, even not so long ago, that there was a kind of ick. People would just think, well, I don't want to even think about older people getting it on, right? Let alone see them in movies, kissing or anything.
If it's our parents.
It's just like, no. But I think that has shifted pretty firmly towards something much more healthy, which is to say, we're all creatures built for love, for connection. And we stumble in and out of it. We find it at different stages of life. You're never too old to fall in love. You're never too old to feel those butterflies as you get your hair ready in the mirror before you go on a first date. I mean, that can happen at 93, it can happen at 19. And that was one of the things that I found so uplifting in the research, was feeling that you didn't have to let that go. I mean, I'm in a happy marriage, so I'm not on Tinder and I'm not on the market at the moment, but it made me feel that even because it reflects into your own marriage, because you begin to think, well, actually, there's no reason to think that the spark has to go away. It evolves and takes on a different form. And that's something I think you see more and more in films now and TV series. You see older couples getting it on, right? And sometimes even with scantily clad, right? Which I think really would have been unthinkable and perceived to be slightly scandalous, if not disgusting, 10, 15 years ago, is now pretty close to the norm. And I celebrate that. I think that's great. And examples like the one you just given of that couple tying the knot in their 90s is just wonderful. These are the stories we want to hear, and how joyful to have all their family around them and just to be in this big bath of love together. How joyous.
Yeah, and fulfilling. And just this idea, if this is such a fundamental part of what it is to be a human being, which is to seek relationship, be excited by relationship, live in relationship, have true intimacy, the messaging that says you're not ruled out of that. You're not out of that class of humans just because you reach a certain age or point in your life. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. That's one of the biggest wins, I think, in the pro-age or anti-ageist, whatever you want to call it, movement, is helping move the dial on that, to make that something that doesn't seem weird and just seems natural and lovely. A wonderful thing. And it's not just love and romantic relationships. It's also friendships. That's actually another one of the benefits of aging, is that one of the things we tend to get better at as we get older is our social smarts, our social acumen sharpens. We get better at listening, at resolving conflict, at reading body language, at leading, at collaborating, working together. All those things that are wonderful in the workplace, but they're also really good in the social scene outside, at cocktail parties, at backyard barbecues, at having a friendship, group or a book club or whatever. We just get more at ease. Part of it's that we're more at ease in our own skin, but part of it is we've got a lot of experience under our belt of socializing, and we get better at it. So one of the myths about aging is that old people are lonely. Now, many old people are lonely. This is a lonely society we live in. But if you look at the numbers, the loneliest age cohort is 20-somethings, right? That's where you find loneliness, the loneliness epidemic at its most acute and widespread. And
dangerous.
Yeah, which totally torpedoes the idea that loneliness is a scourge for older people. It's a scourge for all of us in this messed up world we live in. But, yes, some older people are lonely, but many older people find that they just they may have fewer people in their social circle, because I think what we often do in later life is coming back to that Michelangelo metaphor of chipping away the stone to free the angel in it. We do that socially. We prune. We let relationships go that don't light us up anymore, that are maybe bad for us, that just don't merit our time and attention and bandwidth. And we double down on and go deep on the relationships that really do, which is why, again, a lot of the studies suggest that, and surveys find that people, when they're asked about how much they get from their social lives and their experience and their relationships, is that older people derive more fulfillment. So the older you are, the more fulfillment you're going to get from your relationships, which, again, is another happy thing to look forward to on the horizon, isn't it?
And it feeds back to that idea of the pursuit or the realization of your own authenticity. Yeah.
It is, because
in relationship too, and at that cocktail party.
Yeah, because
small talk you just don't generate.
Because what is a true relationship other than two people meeting authentically? Two people's true selves meeting on a plane, not an airplane, like meeting on a meeting somewhere together, and sparking off and finding things that light them up together. And that's authenticity. I mean, this is the one thing that people find most off-putting in any social setting is fakery, right? It's feeling that someone's being a little bit counterfeit and untrue to themselves and stuff. And we can feel that. And I think especially in later life, as our social skills sharpen, our social antennae get more finely tuned, we pick up on whether people are being real and true to themselves or whether they're putting on a show. And that helps us weed out the people that aren't going to be good for us, and helps us zero in on the people who are.
Yeah, I like your gardening terms, weed out and prune.
Yes, I did a pickling workshop at a communal garden over the weekend, so I've got green metaphors in my head. I think at the moment it must be that.
That's great. The only pickling I've seen around here is pickleball, but that's something else.
That's another thing to look forward to in later life.
As well. Yeah, and the guy that I mentioned to you, the groom of the wedding, and just this also defies our expectations. I believe he's 89. Only 2 years ago, he stopped playing doubles tennis. Wow, yeah. There you go. I mean, a lot of people are doing things while other people are assuming they're not doable. Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to take up tennis in your 70s or 80s, but you could. But just this idea that life and fulfillment and joy and pleasure, the things that used to derive pleasure from, can continue maybe at a slower pace or on a smaller quadrant of a court, but they can be a part of your long life. Yeah. Yeah, that's the lens to bring to the party that is aging, is to think, there's no reason I need to give up any of this. I mean, maybe at some point, some of the things I will, or I'll have to modify them and change them to fit, the capacities my body have at different stages. But this, what we really need to get away from is this idea that some things don't belong to older people, that you've got to give up, renounce all the good stuff and just dress, in black all the time, as people used to do in Southern Europe, and kind of mope around and play the
the grumpy old person. You don't have to do that. You don't have to. There's so many other choices. And it's so much of it is choice, right? It's that lever we talked about earlier. You can pull that. You tell yourself a different story about what the next 10 years look like, what the next chapter you're going to write for yourself is. As soon as you have that different story in your head, a different chapter begins to unfold on the page in front of you. It gets a lot easier.
And it can be influenced by this. It can be influenced by something you heard or something you read that can be a game changer, a reframing point in your life. I heard a man call into a radio show years ago. And I remember this vividly, what I experienced. He called in to talk to, it was talk radio. I know you have that in the UK here, and as well as here, and all over the world, obviously. And he said, I used to be a jet pilot in the military, and my identity was built on being a jet pilot. That's who I was. That's how I shook hands with people. And he said one day he was hit in a terrible car accident, and he lost his ability to be a jet pilot. He was paralyzed and ended up in a wheelchair, and he retired, needless to say, because of that injury, completely, debilitated. And he said, I've been for as long as it's been, I don't know whether that's years or decades, I can't remember now, the miserable, angry guy in the wheelchair. And he said to this talk show host, he said, it's because of something you said that I changed, and I realized I can be the miserable guy in the wheelchair in my town, or I can be the pleasant and happy guy in the wheelchair in my town.
Yeah.
A couple of those circumstances I can't change, but one of them certainly I can. And I think that's really powerful. The idea that we can go change how we're thinking about how we are and who we are and how we are in this world.
That's a lovely story. I mean, one of the ways I help myself keep my self-talk in the right direction and keep my chin up as I move into my sixth decade, I suppose, is looking. I find social media very helpful for this. Is just looking at all, because social media is now carpeted with older influencers, right? People doing remarkable and sometimes not that remarkable, just rather nice stuff at different ages. And I find it really helpful just to see what someone is doing in their 60s. So that's, I'm 3 years away from 60 or 70s, and think, wow, I may not want to do that now because I'm playing ball hockey, but maybe when ball hockey, there comes a point when it's just not fun for me anymore, or fun enough, I could shift over to this, and it colors in the future in a much more kaleidoscopic way that makes you feel hopeful and optimistic. So, we are storytelling creatures as human beings. Stories really help. So just to see other people's stories is a really good and regular feature in the Guardian newspaper. I'm trying to think what it's called. It's something like After the Age of, or something. It's like, and it's just a constant drip feed of stories of people doing things they've always done after 60, or taking up new stuff, and sometimes in their 80s, and they're taking up things you think, wow, I'm surprised. I didn't think I could even take that up in my 50s. You've taken it up in your 80s. And I find these little goblets of hope really helpful, because they just keep you pointing in the right direction with the right.
It's the best use of influencer, isn't it?
The use of influencers.
Yeah, these are influences on our thinking, and therefore we start to reframe how we view our lives and ourselves. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
there's something we haven't talked about, which I think needs to be addressed, and you address it fully or very well in your book, which is the equation of old age, and ugliness. And you even talk about the fact that in some languages, it's the same word. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of shocking. And certainly where we live in, I'll call it Western societies in the UK and Europe, loosely in the US, age, beauty, ugliness, these are, we think a lot about them. We spend a lot to decide them. What are your takeaways? Well,
I think that there's a natural inclination to be physically attracted to youth. So this is something that to keep the species going, right? You need to be attracted, especially to people who can, who are fecund, right? Who are fertile, who are going to advance the species. So that's good. That is always going to be there as a driver. I think what happens is that gets that tilts over. There's a Venn diagram there. So we have that biological urge, the interest and the attraction to sort of youth. But that's that's sort of overlapped over the other bubble in the Venn diagram, which is what we consider to be beautiful. And I think this is what's sort of problematic. This is where culture comes into play, socialization, just life experience and so on. I think that we are still very much, social media, I've been singing the praises of social media for showcasing wonderful examples of people in later life, but it's also a swamp of people who are completely traumatized by their first wrinkle and are rushing off to get all kinds of, interventions and stuff, even in their 20s, right? Because they're so appalled by the idea of looking 30, never mind looking 60. So there's a lot of baggage on that side of the equation, which I think needs to be addressed and taken down. But I do think that we're beginning gradually, and maybe stretching the metaphor here of the Venn diagram, with the kind of biological drive to find that attractive, and then the overlap with what we think looks attractive to look at, just beauty and paintings and posters and album covers and all the places we see people. I think we're starting to separate those a little bit. So you are seeing more and more older people, particularly women, because of course this burden of youthful beauty falls much more heavily on women than it does on men. That is starting to change now in the wallpaper of our culture. So on social media and advertising, you're seeing many, many more older people, older women particularly, advertising or just being out there, right? Being in TV shows and stuff. And it's not because they're there as an older person, they're just sort of there. And it's part of that multi-generational mix. You see other people there, they might be in a group of people and there's one older person and three younger people, and it's not even commented on, right? Or sometimes it is commented on and you have an older person leading an ad campaign and they're talking about being older. I feel like 10 years ago, there was very little of that. It was just young faces that we saw. And if we saw an older face, it was to poke fun at it or be appalled by it, or you just didn't get that many of them. And now you do. So I think that the tectonic plates are shifting here, but it's a heavy lift, right? A lot of it, I think, is partly that biological urge that's going to hold us back. But as the society ages and there are more older people around, and we see more older faces and a wider range of older faces and people aging beautifully in lots of kind of different ways, and that's pushed out into social media and advertising, I think that we will continue to see more of a change, and we'll feel less bad about looking our age or looking older than we did 10 years ago.
I struggle with this. I struggle with this a little because it's so pervasive in the society where I am. There are everywhere you go, even in small strip malls that are pervasive as well. There is somebody offering, injection treatments. They're all over now. It's no longer just if it's something that you would find in call it a plastic surgeon's office. It's been marketed all out through society. And I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong about it, but certainly the option is there. And I'm noticing on social media, people, as you say, in their 20s who are already getting alterations done. And I don't mean because of something that they consider to be a disfigurement. I don't know, whether it's the shape of a nose or some part of their face, but just this fear of imperfection. That's what I feel like it is. Mm-hmm. Because what is it? If you're 20, I don't know that little line or dot is a sign of age to you, but it's imperfect. And maybe that's the reframe that we need.
To move away from beauty to perfection, you mean?
No, moving away from that notion of perfection, which is this is perfection. Look at great art. Look at the art on your wall. I'm looking at it. I see a view of it. Great art or anything that we consider to be beautiful is almost inherently imperfect. It's stunning and it's imperfect.
Yeah. Yes, that's a nice way to reframe it, I think, that because part of the tyranny of the ageist beauty industrial complex is that it really effectively serves up one version of beauty, right? So everybody ends up with the same forehead, often the same nose, the same lips, and it's just stultifying. And it actually ultimately is not that beautiful. It's kind of creepy and boring, right? And in fact, the people who are the most beautiful, who are generally held up to be the most beautiful, often have something a little bit odd about them, something that's off, something that isn't quite perfect, right? In the boring, stifling sense of the word perfect. So yeah, I think we need to maybe step back and reimagine what we think beauty, what it is, right? I mean, it needs to be decoupled, I think, wherever possible from youth. That's the key thing here. And one way, you mentioned art, that may be one way to get to it, is to look at more art, right? People spend so little time looking at great paintings nowadays, but I think there's a lot to be gleaned from standing in front of a great painting, even if you can't get to an art gallery, just looking online and seeing what the greatest geniuses of art throughout the ages, what they put on canvas to beguile and entrance and bewitch other human beings, right? They didn't put somebody who looked like they'd just come out of a plastic surgery clinic with, Botox. They put people who were real and had slight imperfections, but could look transcendently beautiful at the same time. Those things, and I should say, looked transcendently beautiful at the same time. So yeah, maybe getting people, I'm always a big fan of anybody looking at art because I think it's a really good way to slow down and reflect and so on. But that could be another benefit, right? Is redefining what beauty looks like and reminding us that imperfection is kind of wonderful. Right?
Yeah, I think art has a lot of value, obviously, as you do. But one piece is that, the perfection of imperfection. The other is realizing the layering of art when we look at a great painting, realizing that this artist didn't arrive at this usually in one take. It's a process, and if you go layer by layer in the painting, you realize there's a layer and another and another and another, until finally he or she stood back and said, okay, enough. I'm content with this, if not happy with it. Carl, it's just such a pleasure to be with you again.
It's always a joy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We started talking about In Praise of Slowness, which I think is such a good, valuable, important lesson and a great book. And we then moved on to Boulder, which I love and I really highly recommend to people. I want to bring it to book clubs. I'm sure it already is, but certainly in my own experience, because it's not as you say. There's something, actually, let me just briefly read. The Times says, it's about age, but it's not a book for the old. That really sums it up well. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks for the generous shout-outs.
Absolutely. Well-deserved. Thank you.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Lee Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Lee Paz. Musical theme by Amots Plesner. Logo art by Janice Rudnitsky. Graphic design by Gusta Lee Paz. Social media management by Morgan Shanahan and Sophie Bergeron. The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron is hosted by Rabbi Ron Lee Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.